Okay, thank you everyone for coming to today's seminar. We are very glad to have invited Dr. Lukoff to give a talk on a very exciting project on utilizing AR for social justice. So Dr. Lukoff joined us last year. He was already pretty productive despite very busy teaching schedule. So today he will share with us the lessons he learned during this process of developing this meaningful project. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Eve, for the warm welcome. It's really exciting to be here today with a number of familiar faces as well as many new faces in the audience. Today I'm going to present on co-designing the Thámien Ohlone Augmented Reality Tour and discuss some of the lessons that we learned in that process. So our campus here at Santa Clara University is full of all kinds of symbols that recognize the rich Catholic tradition that we have on campus. So here, for example, is the cross at the site of the third mission, Santa Clara. Then we have, of course, the statue of the Sacred Heart near the Adobe Lodge. We have the statue of Joseph, Maria, and Jesus that celebrates family. We have the statue of St. Ignatius of Loyola on the St. Ignatius lawn. And we have a beautiful statue of St. Clare de Assisi, the namesake of our city and our university. And of course, there are many, many more statues and landmarks and symbols that recognize this Catholic tradition that I don't have time to share with you today. But of course, there's also the Mission Santa Clara itself, which is at the center of our campus and an active site of the Catholic faith. And so what I'm trying to share here is that all of this together paints a story or tells a story of our campus that is very much one from a Catholic point of view. And our campus, of course, attracts about 100,000 visitors per year, including many fourth graders in California who are required to study the mission period of history in our state. Myself included. I remember in fourth grade I made a mission out of marshmallows and toothpicks to recognize that part of history. And so many visitors then, including fourth graders, come to our campus to see the mission and some of these monuments. However, there's also the story of people that starts thousands of years before the mission and European colonizers and American settlers ever reached this land. And it starts with a story of the Ohlone people who have stewarded this land for thousands of years. And if you look carefully, you can actually see how the legacy of the Ohlone people carries through from the early years, thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago in the case of the Thámien village, but really even earlier, through to the early days of the Mission Santa Clara, to the beginning of the previous century, and through to today. And of course, the Ohlone people are still here today. So here is Isabella Gomez, the first of what will hopefully be many recipients of the Muwekma and Muwekma Ohlone scholarship for students at Santa Clara University. And so the question then we wanted to ask was, how might we tell the story of the Ohlone people on our campus? And so to do this, we've brought together a truly interdisciplinary team, which I'm very proud of. And many of them are actually in the audience today. And so we have faculty from 4 different departments: computer science, English, anthropology, and art, and students from, I think, over 7 different departments. And it's fitting then that our work was supported in part by the Whittam Scholarship for, or Fellowship for Award for Collaborative Scholarship. And actually, just a little over a week ago, we had our launch event. So we showed the very first sort of closed beta of our augmented reality tour for telling the story of the Ohlone people on our campus. I want to show you exactly what that looks like just off the bat, because oftentimes when I talk about augmented reality, people have no idea what I'm talking about, or everyone has a different vision of what augmented reality looks like, because it's a new and emerging technology, and there's many ways to actually create an augmented reality experience. So we'll go ahead and dive into what that looks like. But here's much of the team that actually put together this experience last week at the launch event. The tribal members, myself, some of the faculty, and some of the students who worked on it, and with the QR code in the foreground that people can scan to launch the tour. So let's go ahead and play a 30-second teaser video of one of our stops on the tour.
Akoi Hope Thámien Ohlone. Welcome to the center of Thámien village. For thousands of years, our ancestors called Thámien home. Once an oak woodland with year-round water sources, this village likely had 300 to 500 native inhabitants.
And so at the center of our campus at that fountain, one of the faculty members on our team, Lee Penich, is actually an anthropologist and archaeologist, and so they've discovered excavated items there that suggest that was the very site of the Thámien village. And so that's why we wanted to locate these tule reed houses, which were the traditional dwellings of the Ohlone people, at this particular site around the fountain that people could then view to see what it once looked like. And show you then what the experience looked like.
Things are helpful to restore and heal our community and to heal the generational trauma that we've endured. But it also serves to show that there's still a lot of work to be done, not only here, but in the Bay Area as a whole.
Part of that work is to highlight that these tribe members are still here, and the university is using technology to do that. Several Santa Clara University departments partnered with Ohlone tribes once native to the land this campus is on to bring their stories to life with the use of augmented reality on cell phones.
For thousands of years, our ancestors called Thámien home.
The Thámien Ohlone AR Tour transforms the SCU campus back to what it was thousands of years ago. 3 stops on the tour were launched Monday, but soon visitors will be able to scan QR codes across campus to learn the stories that these tribe members want people to never forget.
Just knowing that our people's story and how resilient they have been, and that we are here today to be able to tell their story and be their voice. My heart is very happy.
At Santa Clara University, Dustin Dorsey, ABC 7 News.
We were lucky that University Marketing and Communications arranged for 3 different TV stations to actually come and cover the event, and got some film of that's actually the very first time that the Ohlone tribe was trying out the experience, which was a little nerve-wracking to do in front of TV cameras, but we were debugging through the last weekend, but I'm very proud that we were able to launch something that mostly worked pretty flawlessly and communicated the type of experience that we wanted to create. So I wanted to share a little bit about what that looked like before I sort of go on talking about augmented reality forever, so you just have a vision of what augmented reality I'm talking about here. But you might ask the question, why augmented reality? We could equally have written a book, or published a map, or done any number of other things to communicate the story of the Ohlone people. And so I want to dive into a couple of reasons why I think Ohlone or augmented reality is a particularly good medium for the story that we want to tell here. And so one reason is that augmented reality as a medium can really help us envision a more just future. So another project that we're drawing upon lessons from is the Dear Visitor project, which was an AR experience on nearby Stanford University campus that recognizes Chanel Miller, a sexual assault survivor. And after this event happened, the university was in discussions back and forth for a long time with this survivor about installing a plaque and a memorial to recognize that violence. Things never really got off the ground because of some disagreements, and so then some students took the initiative into their own hands and created an augmented reality experience that envisioned what such a plaque might look like. And so here's what they came up with in an augmented reality experience, which was a quote that Chanel had wanted there. And then actually, soon after, it did prompt or lead to the university installing a plaque that's virtually identical at the same location on the Stanford University campus. And so while we think this sort of activism or movement to change the digital world is meaningful in its own right, there's also precedent for it leading to changes in the physical world as well, to envision what a more just recognition of the Ohlone people might look like on our campus, where there are so many monuments recognizing our Catholic history and faith, and virtually none recognizing the Ohlone history of this place. And so what might that look like? Well, there's lots of interesting spaces around campus, like here near the original or some of the oldest standing brick from the Adobe building, where you might imagine some kind of a statue, like of tribal dancers recognizing the Ohlone people. Of course, actually building such a statue and getting it commissioned and getting all the funding and support to have it installed at such a location would be probably a many-year undertaking. And so, we're thinking about, can we start by envisioning that through augmented reality, that is, prototyping future visions of our physical campus? And part of this work comes from the Ohlone Working Group report, which was a working group report released in 2020 by a group of Ohlone leaders, as well as faculty administrators and scholars here at Santa Clara University, to envision what those changes to the campus might look like. And some of those changes have been made already, such as the removal of the plaque recognizing Peter Burnett, someone who was the first governor of the state of California, I think the first president of Santa Clara College, but advocated for the extermination of Native Americans. And some of those changes have not yet been made. So, for example, the working group recommended flying a flag of the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe on our campus, aside those for the university and the state and the nation. But that has not yet been implemented, but maybe we can do that in augmented reality. So another reason to use augmented reality, of course, is that we can just reach more people. And so another inspiration for our work is the Race and Slavery Hollow Grounds Tour by Professor Hillary N. Green at University of Alabama, where a lot of the campus was actually built by slave labor. But that's not really recognized if you go on the official campus tour. And so Hillary Green has taken it upon herself to give some of these alternative tours of the University of Alabama campus. But because she's only one woman and has all the constraints of a busy faculty job, she can only do this a few times a year. So, what if we could create this as a scalable experience where anyone could jump into the tour anytime using, for example, augmented reality? Similarly, there's also, I think, an advantage because of the rapid improvement in this particular technology of augmented reality. So right now, it's just becoming a possibility to do this kind of location-based or site-specific augmented reality that we're doing, where experiences aren't just kind of a scan a Coke can and an actor or a musician pops out at any location, but rather it's specifically targeted at a particular location that has some meaning or connection to that experience. And so we're building with technology developed by Niantic, actually the makers of Pokemon Go. They have a platform for allowing us to do this called 8Wall. But of course, we're trying to tell a bit more of a serious story or a different experience to kind of the fun and games that are Pokemon Go. And Soon, of course, you might be able to experience something like this on the Vision Pro starting next year, or probably already on the Meta Quest 3, which we're going to try out soon. And then sometime in the future, a few years from now, we might have something that's a form factor more like this, actually something nice and wearable, where you can still view augmented reality experiences like the one that we're designing. But for now, we're still using the phone because we want to meet people where they're at, rather than having them walk around campus on a Vision Pro that no one can afford and where they're going to run into walls or whatever else. So we want to get started now and think about in the future how can this experience be scaled or improved when some of these other devices come online. I also want to introduce a little bit about the type of research that I do as a researcher in human-computer interaction, or HCI. So I think of myself as an HCI systems researcher. So what does that mean? Well, the process of HCI systems research is that we generally begin by understanding a problem. And so that might be doing interviews or experience sampling, or in this case, co-design. Then actually designing, so co-designing and prototyping. And finally, on to building. That could be a mobile app or a browser extension or an augmented reality experience. And then evaluating, having some way of evaluating whether or not what you built is on the right track. And so I published at venues in human-computer interaction on projects that do all of these things. But I also want to emphasize that while we generally follow this process in the lab, sometimes it's a little bit messy. It isn't always as linear as this. And so we might start out here and then go down to building and discover what we built isn't what people actually really want to use. And so we have to go back to another phase of understanding. And so we really try and use agile methods, which the students here who are in my Cohen 174 software engineering class will appreciate. We practice that very much in the lab in order to be flexible and adapt to changing understandings of user needs. So how does this fit in as a contribution, as a subfield of computer science? So we have some faculty in this department who do amazing work in computer science that's more on the technical end of, for example, finding out the most efficient video compression algorithms. And usually there's no user involved in that process. In human-computer interaction, though, the type of research that I do, the user is really central. So thinking about how the user interacts with the system or how the user uses the system is core to the research that we do. So what is a contribution? Well, you can think of actually the system oftentimes as using established or known techniques. So we're fine, copying existing open source code, building on existing platforms, and we generally don't develop new algorithms per se. Instead, the contribution is really piecing everything together to create an integrated experience, an integrated user experience that enables some new, exciting, user-friendly, novel experience in the world. And of course, we also study kind of this interaction of how users then actually engage with our system, and also like what processes we might use in designing and developing to meet their needs. Let's dive into the system architecture of what we actually built as an augmented reality experience. So here's a system context diagram. You can see that we have three sort of target personas that we've been thinking about as we design our experience. One are Muwekma Ohlone tribal members, and while they might not be many in number, they're kind of our VIP customers. If they're not happy with the tour and the story that we're telling, we're doing it wrong. So they're a very, very important partner for us in this whole experience. Then, of course, you might have university students such as yourselves or other members of the university community who past research that Lee Panich, our partner in anthropology, has done shows are generally interested in the story, but have limited experience or exposure to the story of the Ohlone people here. And finally, you have a lot of mission tourists, people who generally come to see the Catholic mission church that we have here. And then we want to say, we understand you're here to see the Catholic Church, but hey, by the way, scan this QR code and you can also experience the Ohlone history here. So the experience then is that you need to scan that QR code that we're going to display at high traffic locations on campus. We did so temporarily for our beta launch, and we're going to do so hopefully permanently with some additional permissions from the university going forward. And then they can jump into a mobile web app. And right now we have 3 stops around campus. Eventually we want to go to about 20 different stops around the campus that are all publicly accessible and have a story to tell that's tied to the story of the Ohlone people. The whole process then, of course, is co-designed by our team of SU faculty and students from computer science, anthropology, English, music, computer science, philosophy, and others, as well as, of course, with our partners from the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe. And actually, the focus of my talk and the title is really about this co-design experience. How can we create augmented reality experiences like this one or others for social justice together with partners from a community? And so a lot of that involves, of course, the technical aspect of creating our mobile web app, but also the content creation. How do we create the assets and then fit them into the experience? Because we're not just going to use any sort of off-the-shelf assets or media or recordings that aren't from the tribe. They all need to be sort of approved and encouraged by the tribe's voice here. And then we can dive in a little bit to what the mobile web app actually looks like in terms of the components that we have inside of it. So you can see that we've got our user interface, and there we can display 2D or even 3D content. We have the 8th Wall Web AR service, which is Niantic's service for building augmented reality experiences in mobile web browsers, which is very unique and powerful. And all of that takes input from the 3D models that we've created, as well as the audio. So all of the audio that you heard in that stop were things that we recorded or the tribe recorded for us as things to include in that stop. And then finally, we have a 3D map view, which is also right now it's the same one that you would have in Pokemon Go. We can customize it a little bit as we refine sort of our experience. And then, of course, we also have the LightShift BPS, which is the actual system that will localize the user based on SLAM. So basically what you have to do is scan a particular anchor or object that's unique and recognizable for your phone's camera, and then we will precisely locate you to a particular spot on campus and place the assets that we want around that particular site. What does content creation look if we dive into that container? So we have recording sessions that we've done. We've organized some of those custom recording sessions. We also have external resources that some of our partners have already created, such as scanning some of the artifacts that have been found during prior excavations and putting them on Sketchfab as 3D models, so we can reuse those. The Imaginarium also created some 3D models that we've been able to use, such as the Thule houses for this presentation, or for the first tour stop that I showed you. And all of those 3D models then are shared in a storage, a shared drive that we generally share with the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe, because we want them to own the content as well and reuse it for other events. So actually the recording that we organized for them, they've now played at a San Jose Earthquakes soccer game because they wanted to have something while they did their land acknowledgement while they entered the stadium. So it's their right to reuse and use as they see fit. And then all of that content is what we then think of as our assets that we can integrate into different tour stops. So I'm going to show you 2 more demo videos of what this experience has led to. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what are some of the lessons that we've learned from designing this experience, and what are some of the open questions that we still have about how we can go forward. So we have our 3 initial tour stops. I showed you the Thámien village one, which is located at the fountain. And then we have 2 more, namely Names in the Sky, which is located at the Mission Church, and the Powwow, which is located at the St. Ignatius Lawn, which is actually the site of the Santa Clara University Powwow, an annual event that brings together different Native American tribes. So let's see what those stops look like.
You are now standing in front of Mission Santa Clara. Using your device, look towards the sky to see all of the known Chochenyo names of our 2,475 ancestors who were buried at this location. This native space was witness to the harsh treatment our tribe was forced to endure during the mission period. Every year, this location right here, the St. Ignatius Lawn, becomes a vibrant hub for the powwow at Santa Clara University, featuring traditional food, music, and dance. Listen carefully, and you can hear a sacred healing song in our Chochenyo language, as it was sung by Jose Guzman, our Ohlone ancestor.
So those were the Mission Church, Names in the Sky, and the powwow stops. And I'll now talk a little bit about what are some of the lessons that we've actually learned creating these augmented reality experiences so far. So the first one is to be upfront about limitations. What we quickly discovered was that we had an initial vision of a village stop that I showed you earlier that was going to be this sprawling experience with children running around, animals moving, different models, and like, a babbling brook and everything. And we quickly discovered that if we tried to put that much into a web AR experience, it would totally crash all the time. And our team really was not capable of modeling that many moving avatars all over the place that would meet sort of the needs and accuracy and detail that the tribe expected. So we had to scale back our vision a little bit and just be honest about the limitations of the current state of the technology and our team. And so instead, we've ended up with an experience like this that has these 3 life-size tule houses. It has an illustration of a lively village, so you can see a little bit more what it would have looked like. And then we were able to incorporate background noises of native animals in the area, as well as narration of the experience by a tribal member. And we figured that's enough. That's enough to ship something meaningful for the tribe for now, and they really appreciated the experience, as you can see in that video. In the future, maybe we'll be able to ship something more immersive like this, but for now we wanted to get something off the ground and build awareness around this project and be able to ship something. A second is a lesson around finding the right anchor. So I explained earlier that we're using SLAM localization, and so see here. So that's what this looks like. You need to scan a particular, location. And so here, we initially had the fountain stop actually being scanned here at the Bannon Family Mall. What we quickly realized was, as grateful as we are to the Bannon family for their generosity to the university, we didn't want this to be the Ohlone village brought to you by the Bannon family. And so finding the right anchor then is really important because we want to connect sort of the contemporary meaning of the locations that we have here to the history that we're trying to show. So that's why we moved it to the fountain, which felt more appropriate, even though this is actually easier for us to scan. And that also connects to a big lesson that we learned around answering the question of why here. So because we're creating this location-based augmented reality experience, we don't want this to be an experience that is just the same as something that you could do on your living room couch. No, instead we want it to be an experience where each of the tour stops is intimately tied to the land that we're displaying that particular content and those assets at. So you can see, for example, in the powwow stop, that actually when you scan it initially, you scan that arch, and then we actually have a photo of 2 Native American children sitting inside of that arch to illustrate that this very location is where the powwow actually happens every year. And I think this is very important as a way of course, showing the overall passage of time that we've gone from land that historically has been an Ohlone village to now the older mission sites to sites and dwellings and dormitories of Native American people, including where many artifacts were found, and then to the present day where some of that now is a parking lot that isn't really recognized. And so, how can we sort of tie some of those contemporary sites back to this history and answer that why here question? Finally, there's another lesson in AR, which is around finding the right basket. And so that's really about how we initially wanted to show a basket and basket weaving as one of the contemporary or historical and contemporary cultural practices of the Ohlone people. So we have these 3D models selected as what baskets might look like. We started with actually a basket from the Choctaw Nation, another Native American group, which we very much recognized was a placeholder to just see if we could get everything to work while we were trying to get any 3D asset to work in the first place. And then we moved on to a Ohlone basket from Santa Cruz that we found on Sketchfab. However, we got feedback from our partners and co-designers at the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe that actually Ohlone is kind of an umbrella term. That is, there were once about 40 or 50 tribal groups in the greater Bay Area that called themselves different tribal names and had different identities. And so the contemporary identity of Ohlone was kind of imposed on top of that afterwards. And so the Muwekma Ohlone, the group that we're working with, don't really actually think that their territory and their group extends to Santa Cruz. And so even though this could be Ohlone, it's Rumsen Ohlone. And so we wanted to have kind of the right basket that tells the story of this particular peoples. And so now we're still sort of figuring out what's going to be the right basket for our tour. And so that could be actually a contemporary basket maker from the tribe, Mandy, who lives high up in the mountains somewhere, and we're trying to see if we can get her to come to campus and share her baskets and stories with us. There could be a basket in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. that we're going to try and get access to scan, or a basket in UC Davis. But of course, the rights to these baskets are very tricky and sometimes disputed and contested. And so that's something that we really have to navigate as a part of this project. And I think that connects to kind of this theme of nothing without us, about us without us, which is actually a saying that comes from the disability rights movement. And there it really has this meaning of instead of designing for somebody, you really need to design together with them, because otherwise you might get the wrong basket. And so I think in technology, we sometimes have this ethos of moving fast and breaking things. And I think that sometimes works. If you're going to design a casual game like Angry Birds, that might be the right approach. But in our particular case, that's definitely not the right approach. This is a story that we really want to get right, that we really want to do justice to. And so we need to be more deliberate about how we approach it. And so that means that all of the assets that we're using, as I mentioned before, such as recordings, are things that we've actually arranged and hired the tribe to create for us as part of this tour, and then also, of course, for them to use themselves in other occasions as they see fit. And so this was a really exciting recording session where they sung some of their traditional tribal songs that they haven't been singing for over 100 years, but have revitalized in the past decade. And then, of course, the final lesson is around new co-design methods that we've been developing. So how can we work together with tribes to actually create these experiences or other community partners? So I'll start by just explaining a little bit about what co-design is. So co-design is actively involving all interested parties in the design and development process to develop a more functional, user-friendly, useful, and just product. And so again, it connects to this nothing about us without us saying that I just mentioned. It also connects to notions of participatory design that were developed in Scandinavia in the 1970s and 80s around labor union movements and how laborers could be involved in the creation of technologies for the workplace. The movement for design justice by Sasha Costanza-Strzok and how you can involve marginalized communities in the design of products and services. And it contrasts with this idea of top-down design. That is, we're going to come in, we're going to design something for you, and take it or leave it. And so one of the methods that then we've been exploring and developing as part of our co-design process in augmented reality, which is a relatively new domain, is what we're calling landmark-based affinity diagramming. So how many of you have heard of affinity diagramming before? Raise your hand. Anyone? couple folks. Basically, affinity diagramming is where you would have Post-it notes, and you would write all kinds of themes or features or ideas that you'd want to create as part of a technology experience. And then you would cluster them on a wall, and that would give you some guidance as to, okay, 7 of you have this idea in this direction, and then 3 of you have this idea, or maybe these 2 ideas can be connected, we should prioritize this. So it's a way for interaction designers to create experiences around technology. And what we had as an insight here was that the experiences that we're trying to create as part of this augmented reality tour are also so intimately connected to the land. Why here? And so we printed a giant 10-foot by 6-foot map of our university campus, which is really the canvas for our experience, and then had the affinity diagramming happen on the map. And so the pink Post-it notes are actually brainstorming stories and messages that the tribe wanted to share. And so we had a bunch of different messages here grouped into different categories that we wrote on Post-it notes, such as tribe needs lands to secure their own future, or telling the story of Muwekma veterans who actually served in the US military. And then those were placed on those Post-it notes throughout the campus. We also wanted to brainstorm what media assets we had available because of the saga of finding the right basket. We wanted to see, okay, which ones do we actually already have available, such as recordings, 3D models, other photos, videos, assets that we can include in the tour that are ready to go. And so that's where we were drawing upon sort of the sketch fab that the Community Heritage Lab has already of artifacts that have been excavated, as well as others that we found online, and recordings and other things. And so those blue Post-it notes were then placed by the Muwekma Ohlone tribal members on this map until we were able to figure out what the different future stops might look like. And finally, it may be a little bit hard to see, but we have these little green leaves and yellow leaves, where green indicates top priority stops that we want to start developing as soon as possible, and yellow indicates sort of next tier of priority. So let's get to some open questions. We still have a lot of work left to do. One of those is actually whether we should go for a web app or a native app in the long run. Right now, we've started with a web app, which has certain advantages. It's coded in JavaScript, which generally our team is more familiar with. You can scan the QR code and go, so there's no app download required, which is great for casual visitors to the Mission Church, and they just want to scan a QR code and have another experience. It uses SLAM localization as that experience, where you need to actually scan an object to localize. By contrast, we could use a native app. You'd be developing in Unity or C#. It would have more stable performance, and it would have better localization. So in addition to SLAM, it can also do geospatial positioning, which is to say that it can use your GPS coordinates to place objects around you. And that is actually a lot less precise than SLAM localization. But for some things that don't need to be so precisely located, if you want to have some statue of an ancestor in the distance, or something over the mountains or something, it doesn't need to be that precisely located, and it would be fine. And the advantage, of course, is that from a user experience perspective, you can walk around the campus and you don't need to constantly be finding and scanning different objects. It also enables more features because we can tie into many of the sort of hooks that we can access in the operating system directly, as opposed to having to go through the mobile browser on the phone. Another open question that we have is around how can we co-design together with tribal youth. And so one of the tribal youth is particularly interested in design and technology, and so we're going to think about what does that co-design process look like with that particular tribal youth member. And so that's a new sort of direction that we're going to take things in. And finally, there's a larger question here that might be more general beyond this particular project of how might we create an AR toolkit that empowers educators and storytellers to create social justice tours. So that is, if Hillary Green at the University of Alabama comes to us and says, hey, we'd really be interested in creating an augmented reality tour that tells the story of race and slavery on our campus, what would we tell her? That is, we're not going to have her build the identical experience to the one that we created, but there still might be some general lessons that we can share from our experience of developing this tour that we can provide and share with others. So a few next steps. Well, we have a lot of work to do around performance, stability, accessibility of the experience, as well as getting to, and then we want to get to the launch of an open beta. So what we did previously last week was a closed beta. It was really only available for that one day because we wanted to build some awareness, have the tribe try it out, and then get back to work. So that's where we're at. We want to make sure that we have experiences for users who can't see the visuals, so they can just listen to the audio or they can read the text as well as narrated. And so those are all things that we want to improve in our next iteration. More stops, of course. So we've created 3, but with the tribe, we brainstormed over 20 different other stops, and eventually, with some more funding and support, we'd like to get to 20 or so stops. So, of course, we want to get that basket weaving stop, for example, done too, and so we're hoping to bring in the artisan, the tribal member who creates these baskets, to campus soon to have her record some of her stories and have us scan the basket that she's created so that we could display it in 3D. We've also submitted a workshop proposal to the CHI conference, which is the premier conference in human-computer interaction. No, it's not named after me, but that's the main home community where I publish my research in human-computer interaction. So together with researchers at University of Washington, UC Santa Barbara, Ball State, Carnegie Mellon, JP Morgan, and Princeton, the 3 of us from Santa Clara University are organizing this workshop and really taking the lead in thinking about how we can create site-specific augmented reality experiences like the one that we've created with the Muwekma Ohlone. We also, this year, attended AWE. So I led a group of about 40 SU faculty and students to attend AWE, which is the leading sort of AR, VR conference in industry. And so next year, we'd like to, again, attend AWE, which will be unfortunately not held in Santa Clara any longer, but in Long Beach, which still isn't that far, I suppose. And this time we'd like to actually present our own work on this AR tour through the social impact track that they have there at the conference. And then finally, we want to work towards not just having a local impact, local social impact on our campus, but also having kind of a global impact by developing this AR toolkit for social justice tours. And so we want to create a guide and a set of resources that will empower educators and storytellers worldwide to create alternative tours that challenge traditional narratives. So if you're interested, we are recruiting. We'd like to welcome some new storytellers, 3D artists, designers, and developers to our team in the HCI lab that's creating this experience. So visit suhci.com and you can see more information about how to apply and join our team. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and I welcome your questions. Yeah, go ahead.
What was one of the most technical challenges that team faced?
One of the most challenging technical problems that we faced. I think getting the localization to work is probably one of the things that was very difficult. We had a lot of instances of like 20 people going to the location at the fountain and 2 of them scanning successfully. And so that's a pretty bad failure. And really the one that we wanted to avoid last week, which fortunately we were able to. Tiffany, do you want to say anything about how you overcame that problem?
Yeah, that required a lot of research into what is good spot. So when we talked to some of the developers, they talked about reflection and also just getting a lot more scans of both the location itself, but also the surrounding areas so that you can turn around without completely losing localization. It's really helpful because a lot of work on the groups, we found that people tend to turn around and stuff.
And yeah, another quick one. Mohan, do you want to say a couple words about compressing assets? Because originally, like some of the Thule houses and other things that we had were very large files. And so we needed to compress everything down as sort of a web AR experience.
Yeah, so since we are using a local network, sometimes the overall app should be at certain limits so that we have a better experience. So we compress a lot of assets, like 3 assets, and then we try to put it more so that it will load more faster when they are there.
Yeah, so Mohan did a lot of research into how we can efficiently compress assets without losing a lot of quality. You had another question, yeah, or someone else, yeah.
Thank you for the lecture, Professor. It was very great. And my first question is, like, what impact it had, like the scanning have when there's any other living being in the scenario? If you're clicking a video or a picture to see what is happening in that, like, it might be the case, like if you're going to take a picture of a location and there might be other people. So will the scan be able to recognize the location even if there are people there, or will it not be able to recognize? So what stage is the...
Yeah, in my experience, it's now working reasonably well after many of the optimizations that Tiffany described. The main thing that I find confuses it is if you're scanning the fountain, right? So we're using SLAM localization that recognizes the fountain and its location and places the objects relative to that. If you turn around completely, very quickly from the fountain, and now it doesn't know where the fountain has gone, then you can actually lose sort of the whole experience. It drops and it tells you to scan again. If you sort of move steadily and slowly around the fountain, even if like someone were to like walk by or something like that, it generally stays present and stable. There are some other factors that affect this as well around like lighting conditions too. So we've tried to scan now at different times of day so that if you get like shadows cast from the trees over the fountain, it still recognizes that. We also tried scanning. We had them turn off the fountain and had them scan during that window when it was turned off to get sort of all different settings of like things that might confuse it. So the fountain actually is a very tricky one because of the movement of the water, and it can be on or off and these shadows. So it's probably not, from a technical standpoint, the best anchor. The Bannon Family Mall lawn sign would have been a better sort of technical choice. However, again, we wanted to choose things that made sense from a social perspective, not just a technical one. And hopefully we can then get the technical stuff to work around it. So.
Sorry again. One other suggestion I have is like since you have the map, SU map site within yours located, so one other suggestion from my end is like if you could use that to help people who are new to the university to get to the locations, because sometimes Google Map doesn't access the SEU map site, so it will not be able to recognize where to go and what to go. Since you have the access to the map site, and if we can augment it, like I'm in this location and how to go to this, and this might help people who are new to the university to get to the lot of points.
Yeah, you should connect with Dr. Angela, and Brian, I think, is somewhere here in the audience. I saw earlier, I think maybe, because there's a senior design team that's working on exactly this problem. So yeah, you should connect with them. I can connect with them.
For a person like me, it's a very important problem. I get lost very easily if I stand.
I do too, especially as a new professor. So yeah, I totally identify with that problem. I think it's a little different from the problem that we're addressing here, but definitely the same technology can be used.
Yeah.
So. Other comments or questions? Yeah, Rob.
Oh yeah. So I know you guys are still like going to be like working on open beta. So this is kind of like a in the future kind of question, but I'm guessing you guys would also just be working on like one location or like 2 or 3 locations at one time. So my question is, how would you determine when like a location is kind of like done or like complete to move on to new locations? Or if you haven't like come up with that, I guess it's also fine.
No, that's a good question. You're exactly right that now because we're creating these smaller bite-sized stops rather than like one giant village stop with everything, it's actually made the project management a lot more manageable because we don't have to ship something with the avatar of the children running around and babbling brook and everything. Rather, we can ship something that is good enough to represent the village and still does the story justice. And so I don't think of that stop of the Thámien village that we showed as like completely done. We'll never revisit it. In fact, we still have to re-record the narrative or the audio in a professional recording studio right now that was done on a phone. We still want to add some of these features eventually, but we still felt like it was good enough to get out into the world and start telling this story. And then, how do we decide when, to move on from a stop? Probably when we have something that's good enough to ship for now that the tribe is proud of and tells their story, then we can get out the door. And then we can, as a next step, sort of revisit, okay, does it make sense to put more effort into that stop and continue working on that stop? Or, should we add some additional stops that now have become unlocked because we've gotten sort of additional assets or additional narratives available to us?
So I have one more question is, because I know that this is like a co-design team is getting more developer and designer. So I'm wondering if as a developer join the team, will the developer is more focused on the technical issue, or they also will get involved the whole brainstorm this research?
So certainly you would have an emphasis as a developer on the technical aspects. I'm not going to expect you to be singing Ohlone songs or something like that, right? But I do expect as a developer that you would be involved in other aspects of the project too, so that it wouldn't be a purely technical role. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of the students, the wonderful students who've worked on this project with me, is that they show up at the powwow. They show up at some of our co-design sessions with the tribe, because then they can give feedback on is this idea technically feasible? And they can better incorporate their understanding of what the tribe wants and the story that we need to tell into the way that they do the technical implementation of the work. So in that sense, people in our HCI lab all have to have what we call a socio-technical skill set or orientation. That is, to be interested in not just the technical, but also the social.
One more question, if we have any. Amen.
You mentioned earlier about the location and anchoring to the design. Is there any flexibility about that? In other words, how true to original locations do you really have to be if you acknowledge shifting, right? So I'm thinking of examples like the famous bar where the outlaw got shot and he moved across the street, and so technically died in the same two different locations. So a historical tour could pick either one and still be truthful. So if you needed to shift stuff to better align with current urban changes and stuff that gets in the way, is that accepted, or is it a huge no-no?
Yeah, and sometimes there's even a little ambiguity about exactly where the village stood in the first place. Was it 100 meters over this way? I think we're trying to do our best. There's interestingly sort of two cases. One is where the objects were previously found there, but there's no sort of symbols or recognitions of why the particular experience would be located there. And the fountain stop is a little bit like that, in that the village once stood there, but when you're a visitor, you probably wouldn't know, right? Or you wouldn't notice if it scans there or scans somewhere 100 meters away. So in that case, it's kind of debatable. In some other cases, I think, like the Mission Church example of Names in the Sky, I think having it right there is very powerful. That is, actually displaying the names in the sky above the Mission Church and recognizing that this is a location that is mostly seen today as a site of sort of Catholic faith and tradition. But in fact, oftentimes there were 2 European missionaries there and about 1,400 native people. It should be recognized as also a site of native culture and history. And so making that clear at that particular location feels powerful and appropriate rather than doing it, at Saidi. We have time for one more, or should we wrap up?
Do I have a quick question?
I was just wondering, isn't the area next to the mission a cemetery?
Yeah, that's right. So that's actually one of the next stops that we have planned as our top priority, because the burials there of native people are are totally unrecognized. And so that's a top priority for the tribe. And so we have a vision of showing abalone shells, which traditionally would have been used in burial grounds for Native people in Ohlone at that site to recognize that history and show some of their stories. So thank you.
Okay, all right. So thanks, Dr. Lukoff, for sharing such a meaningful project and the deep research and insight behind it. I was amazed by how quickly you can assemble such a diverse team from 7 different departments. I was not as successful, even I've been here for more than 11 years. I need to learn from you. I guess you all have more questions, so you feel free to contact Dr. Lukoff offline. And I see some new faces. Just a reminder that we have these weekly seminars alternating between Tuesday and Wednesday. Next week will be on Tuesday, presented by Dr. Shiva and on large-scale database research. So feel free to come. I know this is a busy week for you because of the midterm. I really appreciate to see everyone here. Hopefully, I can see you again next week. Okay. All right.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
So we actually more
You're working on the lab, right?
but